So, Japan is widely considered to be one of the best, if not the best, place to find secondhand watches. And I did my research, had money in hand, and actually went to Nakano Broadway, Ginza, and then also went to some watch shops in Shibuya, and then also visited some in Osaka. And to be honest, I came back empty handed. And so I'm going to walk through sort of the research I did, my journey through looking for the watches that were on my list, and then at the end, some observations and just some learnings that I ended up finding along the way. So for me personally, I took a look at my collection and sort of what was missing or what were pieces that I wanted to add to my collection. And the number one thing on my list that I was on the hunt for in Japan was the Omega Seamaster 41 automatic, but from the Pierce Brosnan Bond era. Next up on the list was a Cartier Drive, specifically that model because I like how it looks, but I've never been able to find one here in the States, at least in the city I live in, to try one on. And also the prices are about $3,500. So that made it a really good Cartier entry into my collection because I don't have any Cartiers at all, and I don't really want the sort of what everyone else has, which is the Tank and the Santos. So that's what sort of had me looking for the Drive. And then next up was the IWC Ingenieur. I had the current model Ingenieur, but it didn't actually fit my wrist during the summer, and so I ended up selling it before they had retrofitted, I believe, the IWC Yachtmaster clasp onto the Ingenieur class to give you that micro adjustment. So I sold that one. I didn't really want to spend another $12,000 to get that back into the collection, so I was looking for the prior generation. That was something that felt like a good compromise for me. And then lastly on the list was the Tag Heuer Monaco. I've tried one on at the Tag Heuer boutique here in town. I like how it feels on the wrist, although it was definitely something that it'd be cool to have, but it's not something that I absolutely feel like I need to have in my collection. So I started to do some research. So having the watch models that I was looking for in mind, I went to Chrono24. I filtered the app for the location being in Japan and was able to find some examples of the watches I was looking for in varying, conditions and box and papers and all that. And that just gave me a sort of price range. So if I'm in Japan and I'm doing the yen to dollar conversion, is this within reason in terms of what my research showed? So that's what I did beforehand. So I had certain price ranges. So for example, for the Omega Seamaster that I was looking for, I had seen things from maybe $3,500 to $4,500, depending on how good the condition was, if it had box and papers or not, if it had been serviced or refinished more recently. So I at least had those data points to help me or help my search more targeted when I was walking around at those shops in Japan. I took all that information, and the first big stop that we took in Japan was going directly to what most of Instagram and YouTube say to go to is Nakano Broadway. And so I actually had, when we were walking in, there's sort of this outdoor arcade type feel where you're walking down this main road right after you get off the subway station. I found I don't know what the name of the watch store was, but it wasn't actually in the mall itself, but it was right outside. And I found an IWC Ingenieur, the exact model I was looking for, and it was actually about $4,500. The only problems were no box, no papers, which given the price was to be expected, but the links, the watch fit perfect. It doesn't have micro adjust though, and it didn't come with any extra links. So I think that for me just nixed it out of contention because I didn't want to have to come home, try to find links. So we kept walking. We went into Nakano Broadway. We went to Fire Kids first because that's on the first floor. And that's really where we found really cool watches in pretty good condition given, some of these are from the 60s, 70s, 80s. Uh, I wasn't able to find anything on my list. My wife, however, was able to find a Tag Heuer SEL that she had been on the hunt for. This was popularized by Ayrton Senna, F1 driver, and she'd been wanting this watch for months. Goes to Japan, first store that we walk into together. She is able to find it, but granted, it was the one example that we were able to find in the whole Nakano Broadway mall. So she bought that one. And something that I did not have on my list, just a little background about me. I'm very much into Tudors, and so it was nice to see that they had like a little display case full of old Tudors. They had like an old Monarch that I got to try on, but it's not like the new Monarch. It's got like a weird, rectangular case shape. That was a really cool watch. Not on my list, so I didn't really want to purchase it. But they did have a chrono that they had in the display case that I got to try on. It didn't fit because it wouldn't go through my wrist and there wasn't extra links. But it did have the Rolex crown because at that time Tudor didn't have its own cases, so they actually borrowed parts from Rolex. That made me second guess myself if I did want to get something that wasn't on my list. But at the end of the day, I had literally just bought the Tudor Black Bay Chrono Carbon 26. I didn't want to add another chronograph, and specifically Tudor, to the collection. So that's where having my list of stuff I wanted and also knowing your collection, it prevented me from, I think, dropping $7,000 to $8,000 is what the price of that watch was. Definitely cool to see one in person, but overall, Fire Kids for me was, I left empty-handed there. And then we went up to, I believe, the second floor, and that's where the famous Jack Road and Betty shops are. And so my wife went to the Betty side, and then I went to the Jack Road side. I found a version of the watch, the Omega that I was looking for, but it was in the smaller 36 size. And so that was another no-go for me. And then unfortunately, that shop had a lot of Rolex. They did have other brands, but they didn't end up having anything else that was on my list. Overall, it was awesome to get to walk through Fire Kids and Jack Road and Betty and some of the other shops that we stopped in at Nakano Broadway. Get to actually see watches that you'd never seen before, or maybe just have seen on Instagram or on YouTube. Get to try these on. And so that was awesome. But at the end of the day, I walked out of, that whole Nakano area not having purchased anything. So after leaving Nakano, we took a metro down to Ginza. So while visiting several watch shops at Ginza, I was able to find I guess it's a re-release of the Heuer Monaco. So this on the dial does not have any tag mentions. And it was, I believe, at least the shop had it referenced as the Steve McQueen Heuer. So this reissue was about $5,000 with box and papers. I almost actually ended up purchasing this watch, but having just added a chronograph to my collection, a month or two before going to Japan, and it being further down on my list of watches that I'd actually like to own, I didn't end up, spending those $5,000. I wanted to keep trying to find either the Omega or the Cartier. And so I left that watch store not having purchased the Heuer Monaco. And then this is almost like a little side quest that we took. But if you're on Ginza Street, we stopped into the Seiko House, which is the flagship Seiko boutique in the world. And so we stopped in there. It was really awesome to see on their second floor. That's where they have all the Grand Seikos and, sort of their museum displays of all the different dials that they have. They have a little resin casing of a watch movement sort of exploded, so you can see what makes up a watch movement, which is really cool. So that was awesome to see. But me personally, I can appreciate the care and craft that goes into the Grand Seikos, but for me, putting them on, it doesn't really do it for me, or I haven't found the watch from Grand Seiko that I'd like to purchase. However, I did get to try on the King Seiko, the new Vanek models. The stainless steel models, wearing them in person, are very heavy, but they had just gotten in the model that was the new titanium model, and I tried on the purple version, and I really liked that watch, but I don't know what it was, but for me, I was like, it wasn't on my list. I know I'm here in Japan, and Seiko's from Japan, so that's more why I was thinking about purchasing it, but overall, like, having tried on the Tudor Monarch, the newly released one, and the Vanek, they don't look the same, obviously, but sort of the more angular case shapes, the bracelets sort of having the H links. There's some design elements that are easily, you can see easily that, you know, they're similar-ish. I actually prefer how the Monarch wears, and so that's why I was like, I don't know that I'll, you know, dropped, I think it was $3,000 on the King Seiko Vanek. So that was another watch. While it was cool seeing in person, I also ended up passing on. And so that brings me to the last part of this video, which is sort of my overall learnings from having done the research, being on the ground in Japan, trying to find these watches, and then at the end of the day, coming back. I think for me, the first big thing was I'd never seen that many vintage watches all in one place. And so we actually ended up going to BB Garage in Osaka as well. And seeing all the vintage watches from Fire Kids to Jacquard and Betty to BB Garage, there's definitely a wide range of conditions that these watches can be in. Some of the more like nicer shops, like in Nakano, watches might have been recently serviced, which means like, you know, the movement's been worked on, the case has been refinished. So like there's watches that actually look really nice versus at BB Garage, a lot of these watches, I think they maybe try to like hand polish them or like do some touch up work there. So like those watches, in my opinion, looked not as nice in terms of their refinishing. And they like I saw someone polishing one of the crystals, I think, on one of the watches that they had. And so for me, what I learned was I'm not really a vintage watch person. Being as meticulous as I am in terms of taking care of all of my stuff, I like to keep a watch looking as nice and clean and new as possible. Granted, you know, every watch that I buy, I wear on a daily basis. Nothing is nice enough to not wear. That's why you won't see me really have any or want any thing that has gold in it, because I want stainless steel. I want to use it every day, whether it's at the beach, at the pool, going to the playground with my daughter. Like, it doesn't matter. It's a watch that's meant to be worn. So that's why I prefer that material over gold or nicer pieces. So for me, even though I do use my watches, I like to keep them as nice and clean as possible. So what I learned was I'm not a vintage watch person. You know, all the wear marks and, you know, people that wear them even harder than I do, I don't want to own that. And then also for me, if I see any sort of like patina or like rust on the hands and things like that, like instant turn off for me. So I learned that I'm not a vintage watch person on that trip. Lesson number 2 was, I guess like I hadn't thought about this before going, but was just how overly saturated these watch stores are with Rolex. So if that's all you collect, or so like, for example, for me, I'm fortunate that I have a really good relationship with the Rolex AD that I work with. So they know that we're watch enthusiasts, that we, you know, buy our watches to wear them, that we don't really buy, like, there's nothing on our wish list that's like a hype piece. And so we have a good chance, like if we want something, that will be allocated it in a reasonable amount of time. So I didn't go, like, for me, also another rule is I won't shop for a Rolex or any watch, you know, over retail. And so I didn't go wanting to buy a Rolex, but it was really interesting seeing that there's so much Rolex over there. So like half the shop, if not 3/4 of most shops, is just dedicated to Rolex. So if you'd like a Pepsi or a Daytona or like any flavor of Daytona, you can basically see all of Rolex's catalog and all the hype pieces all over most of the stores in Japan. And there was some stores that you'd walk into and they're like, oh, we're only Rolex. And so for me, like, and for probably most of you that watch these videos, if you're a watch enthusiast and you like all different brands, that was something that was a little bit of a turnoff for me, was going into these stores expecting to see all these different types of watches, but to mostly see Rolex. So that's something that I learned firsthand. And then my last learning, and it's not more of a learning, it's more of an observation, was while I didn't end up getting to buy any watches that were on my list, it was definitely nice to just go and see different watches that I wouldn't have had the chance to see in person anyway, all in one place. What was really cool was my wife finding the watch that she'd been wanting for, months at this time. And then also my daughter at the little pop-up shop that they had, she ended up liking I believe it was an 80s or 70s Seiko. And so we actually got that for her. And so that's something that my wife and daughter share now, is that they like going vintage watch shopping. And when we were at BB Garage, there's like this little $30 vintage watch that my daughter liked. And so she picked that one up as well. And so that's just like memories that she got to make in Japan. And so for us, for better or for worse, we got her into watches as well. So it was really cool for her to be excited about going shopping and like all the different pieces that she gravitated towards. So that was really cool getting to see her get excited about that. And for me, being that we were in Japan as well, not related to watches, but we went to Map Camera and I was able to get her a little used Nikon D3300 with a 35mm lens for $200. And so for the rest of the trip, I shot on my camera and then I would pull out hers. And so we'd be walking around and she shot on her little DSLR and I shot on my camera. So that was really cool that my wife and her got to, share vintage watch shopping together. And then for me and her to share, like her getting into photography. So that was, made the trip that much more fun. So if I can give you any tips, or if you're going to Japan and you don't know where to start, I think for me, having put together a list of watches that I really wanted and complemented things that were missing in my collection, I think having that list, having done research about like what prices were reasonable, for me, I didn't end up leaving feeling like I didn't get anything, or like I like feeling sad that I didn't walk out with a watch being in Japan. Because I knew, here's the things that I wanted. I wasn't just going to spend money for the sake of spending money. And so I think if you go in with that sort of mindset, you won't have regret coming back out of it. Although the other sort of strategy, like my wife did, was she wanted a watch that she knew didn't cost, over $2,000. So she was actually able to find her Tag Heuer SEL, which was awesome. But then for her, she likes these smaller, more vintage, like from the 60s, 70s style watches. And so those, if you're in the market for something like that, I think she found her Rado and her Omega for about, I want to say $300 to $400 a piece. So if you want to get pieces that are older or that aren't as popular, or you don't really mind what condition that they might be in, there definitely are deals to be had in the $300 to $500 range. And specifically, like if you are into Seiko watches, BB Garage in Osaka, they have so many Seiko watches all over the place. And I mean, like other places in Nakano and in Ginza did have Seikos, but it was really cool. Like at BB Garage, there's actually 2 locations. So there was just Seikos like all over the place. So if that's your jam, definitely recommend, if you're in Osaka, visiting BB Garage. But yeah, it's either like you go in with your set list of like more expensive pieces and you don't stray from that, or you kind of go in with the strategy that my wife had, which was maybe a piece that's like 1,000 to 2,000. And then if you like watches that are less expensive, being that they are less expensive, if you find one, a good example of one, you're like, okay, cool, I'm just going to pick that up, and it's $300 to $500. Versus for me, I didn't want to spend $5,000 to $8,000 in the case of the Tudor on, oh, it's here, even though it wasn't on my list, so I'm going to drop eight grand on a watch that I hadn't thought of before. So yeah, I think those two strategies, for me, it worked well, not leaving Japan feeling any sort of regret. And then for my wife, it worked well for her getting the watch she really wanted, which was really lucky that we found it at the first shop that we walked into. And then two, just getting to pick up, these little pieces that looked cool and didn't break the bank in terms of being $300 to $400 or $300 to $500, I believe. And then my daughter got to find some really cool pieces that she liked. That's sort of the strategy that we played to. If you have any questions about my experience, my wife's experience, watch shopping in Japan, please feel free to put those in the comments below and I will make sure to answer. If you like videos like this, like videos about watches, or I'm starting to branch out into photography as well, please subscribe and like this video, and thank you for watching.